Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. I am your host, Candy Barone, and it is absolutely my thrill and delight to have my guest who will be joining us in the ring today to go a few rounds talking about all kinds of things as it relates to leadership among who knows what else. And so before we even get started, let me say hello to my fantastic powerhouse guest, Miss Cheryl Ginnings. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Candy. Glad to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. And I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while. I have actually known Cheryl for quite some time. We have had the privilege of meeting years ago through an organization that we play with. And now we are part of another organization together. And so the more I've watched Cheryl step in her space and really tell her story, really was compelled to have her on the show. And I want to have her share her message and her insights with all of you. So before we dig in, I just want to remind all of you, if this is your first time joining us, this is our space to have the big conversation around leadership. What does leadership mean in today's environment? What does leadership mean as an individual and how you step up? Because leadership ultimately is truly a function of how you choose to show up, how you choose to serve, and how you choose to take personal responsibility inside that space, which means we have a wide open forum and platform to talk about all the juicy, rich, meaty topics that we can dive into. And you know that I do not like to do surface shit on this show. So we dig in, we get real, and we oftentimes get pretty vulnerable. And so as always, if you find yourself triggered by things that we talk about, step into a space of curiosity. Ask yourself where that trigger is showing up and allow yourself some grace to walk yourself through that journey to see where you might come on the other side. So with that, let me introduce you to my amazing guest. Cheryl Ginnings is a global radio host, international best-selling author, 3 times international speaker, coach, and consultant. She was raised in a minister's family. She learned early how to help and care for others and help those with needs. She has been married to a minister for 52 years. Wow, congratulations. That's awesome. Monty and Cheryl have 3 children, Blake, Amy, and Brooke. Blake has cerebral palsy and has been her driving force to helping others with caregiving issues, disabilities, and how to help coach them through some of their greatest challenges. She has been a contributing writer for 40 years to magazines, but has recently been in 10 books and has her own It Takes Courage to be a Caregiver. Amen to that. Available on Amazon and Kindle. Her radio program is on Bold Brave Media on Mondays at 9 o'clock Eastern Time from New York City. It can be heard on speaker.com /tune in, and we'll have all this for you in the bottom of the notes. And it focuses on helping caregivers take care of themselves and help prevent burnout and premature death. And so I love that we're going to get into this conversation. We actually had a guest not too long ago talk about something similar about the space of caregivers and how do you as a caregiver take care of yourself. And so Cheryl, just a little bit, I know I talked a little bit about, your background in a really small dose, but tell us a little bit more about how you arrived at this point. Tell us a little bit more about your family and your son and what really got you into the space to carry this message.
Well, as a mom, you never expect that you're going to have a child with some kind of an issue. And so it was a big surprise when we had problems at birth. And in fact, the doctors knocked me out with ether for a couple hours while they found the doctor. And then by that time, he was born before I even woke up. And when I did, they said, everything's fine. And I didn't know until a year later. Now get this, that doctor told my friend, he remembered Blake because he didn't breathe right at birth. And they gave him oxygen and then did nothing. He left town and they did nothing. And it wasn't until about that was 4 o'clock, and by midnight he turned blue. So they thought, we better put him in an incubator. But anyway, from that time, I was not a very big speaker. I wasn't wanting to be in that space. My mom had been a great teacher, and my dad was a minister, and but I was always a little bit more self-conscious. And so this was not an easy process. But I tell you what, when you have a child that needs something that you cannot find a way to provide and you're searching everywhere, you will learn to find your voice. And that's what I encourage moms to really listen to themselves, because I had doctors tell me, oh, put him away, forget you ever had him, just have other kids, don't worry about this one, like they're throwaway. And it really made me so angry that we were treated like that. And I have to tell you, things haven't changed a lot. He's 48, will be 49 in September, and a year and a half ago he was in the hospital. They thought it was going to be a one-day surgery to put a feeding tube in because he was losing weight. Turned out his stomach was connected to his heart. We had 2 bad surgeries. Then they sent us to Dallas for another one, and 5 heart and lung transplant doctors saved his life. Well, you better believe I was right there trying to fight for everything he needed. And I had a hospitalist come in and say, you need to sign this DNR right now. And I said, well, I want to wait and talk to my doctor. Well, we don't have time. You need to sign this right now. Look at him. He has no quality of life. So, Candy, those kind of remarks are what really fire me up and give me the engine to keep going. And I have just learned that if you're going to have anything that's really good and provided for your child, you're going to have to learn to find that voice inside of you that maybe doesn't want to come out, and maybe you're hurt and you're angry, you feel guilty, you don't know what went wrong, but you just think, well, maybe I did something wrong, maybe I didn't take enough vitamins, or whatever. Your mind does that. But once you can accept the fact that you've got a problem that needs to be dealt with, no matter what the problem is, then that's when you can say, okay, what can I do about it? And one of the things that I try to help people understand, no matter what happens to them in life, and we all have things like, jobs that we lose, or going into financial disarray, even if it doesn't end in bankruptcy. There's all kinds of things that will happen to everybody. You are not the first one to have this happen to you. You will not be the last. So what lessons are you learning as you go through this that will make you stronger in what you can share with other people? Yeah. And if you stop with the word why did this happen to me? Why did God do this to me? You cannot go forward. You have to leave that alone and say, it really doesn't make any difference why something happened.
Well, and it's interesting.
What am I going to do?
I want to dig into that for sure, because that's a powerful concept. I think we spend a lot of energy and a lot of time asking why or why not, why not. And one of the things that we do a lot of talking about is how, when, and why are none of your business, and they're not in your domain. They are of God's domain, the universe's domain, whatever you choose to believe in. And I think it's really powerful. How do you separate yourself from that? Because it can be a very toxic space when you keep going, why? How do you lift yourself out of that space of that curiosity and justification? Because there's that space, I think, a lot of times where why comes in as we're trying to justify a circumstance, which puts us in that victim mentality when we're like, well, tell me why. I need to know, as if we think having some miracle message around why is going to change the incident itself. And so how do you, as a caretaker, as a parent, when you're in that space, that it'd be really easy, and that tends to be our natural instinct, is to say, well, why me? If God is so this, or if the universe is whatever, then how come this happened? Because I don't feel like that's just. And you hear that a lot. How do you lift yourself out of that space?
Well, one thing that you can think about is, why not me? Why would it be somebody else? And if it's somebody else, who would you want it to be? But then there are a lot of people that justify this by saying, oh, you were so good. God gave you this big problem because of that. Well, I don't believe that either. I'm sorry. I believe that He allows nature to take its course, and when things happen, He gives us the strength to go through it. But He doesn't promise to take away all of the problems that we have. That is not His promise. And so if we understand that there are things that are going to happen that are out of our control, but staying in the space of feeling like a victim and feeling all sad and depressed and negative just makes other people want to run away from you. So I just tell people, you have a choice, and your choice is, am I going to be a better person because this happened to me? Or will I become a bitter person, and everybody will want to leave me alone and not have anything to do? And then I'll have more to cry about because everybody left me.
Well, what a beautiful
it's really a useless battle. I'm
Well,
sorry?
there's a beautiful distinction in that space. I love that question. Am I going to be better or am I going to be bitter? And that one letter, right, that E to an I, changes.
Right.
Because think about it too, that E is more of an expression out, and that I is all about me and, oh, woe is the day, right? And so even that
Right.
letter is kind of surprising, but that, am I going to choose? Because here's the thing, we can't change the circumstance, whatever it is.
Right.
It's like people that keep looking in the rear view mirror, wondering why the past is what it is, and they're trying to relive the past and change it. It is what it is. It's not going to change. And so to ask that question, I think, is such a powerful place of empowerment and responsibility to say, am I going to choose to be better because of this, or am I going to be bitter in spite of it? And so, or because of it, right? And so that
Right.
space of better or bitter is really powerful.
Well, and if you think about it, when you say, I want to be a better person because of this, and you don't have to really say those words, but it's a choice of your attitude, how you will deal with that situation. It will determine how you will deal with other situations. Are you going to allow yourself to continually blame somebody else for what happens to you?
Right.
Or will you take responsibility for, okay, what can I do about this? Well, when our son was born, we had no help. Nobody knew what it was. The doctor that we finally had that was really nice actually said, well, we studied cerebral palsy maybe a half a day in school. I don't know what to tell you. And so I had to search for the information, and I had to go to libraries. There was no internet. There were no cell phones. There were none of these things that we take for granted right now. But when I found that there were schools somewhere, then we started trying to investigate how can we get to be part of that, because we didn't know what we were doing. Our son couldn't hold his head up. We were at the doctor's office every week going, he cries all the time. Well, he's not crying now. His eyes look funny. Well, they don't look funny now. Well, he acts weird, and those turned out to be seizures. But we didn't know what they were. We didn't know how to describe things even. Yeah. And so we had some specialists who told us there's nothing wrong. He's probably just slow, but no slower than you were when you were a child. And that made me mad, because at the time I was trying to teach little babies in Bible classes, and they could watch me and learn from expressions and respond. And I thought, you're crazy. Babies can respond. Why wait? And that's been, it was up to us to try to figure out, okay, what can we try that might work? Mm-hmm. And so I invented things along the way with my clothesline that younger people don't even know what that is now. But, I got anchors and chains and had a little seat made for him, because I thought, well, if I can get him upright, maybe he'll walk. Well, it didn't work. It flipped him upside down, and we went through trying to do all these things by ourselves because we didn't have therapy. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, if he can ride a tricycle, that'll teach his feet how to move, and everything. Well, we kept inventing the tricycle as he kept growing. And of course, everything is so slow with a special needs child that we would get a little bit bigger tricycle and extend the wheelbase out a little further, and kept going to welders and had a seat put on and had things for his feet to hold them on. And I had therapists that we finally, that never worked. And when we finally got it adjusted for him, guess what? They actually had more tricycles made for other children. And now there's a group in our town that actually has special tricycles made for people with disabilities, and they're made to the proportion of their body. A physical therapist actually measures them for it. So it makes me think, it wasn't so bad. If it didn't work, we tried. It wasn't like we sat back and waited for somebody else to do something. Yeah. And so a lot of the things that I am trying to help other people with now are to try to learn from things I did, but things that I didn't know to do, and things I did not understand, like caring for myself.
Well, and I'm going to talk about that piece a little bit. And, it's interesting. I remember my brother now is 42. How old am I? I have to think about it. And when he was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes, it was a similar situation. There was no information. And I remember them telling us stuff because he would go into ICU. He would have diabetic comas and he would go into shock and he would do different things. And there was no information. And that idea of trying to learn and people telling you you're crazy and then having to fight through even when he had needles in school, right? Because to explain to the nurses and people are like, I don't understand why your kid has to eat so many times a day and why he's shooting himself up kind of thing. And you're like, and why he's pricking his finger. And so that education, I think, is really big. And so when you talk with other parents in particular, but caregivers in general, when they're in that journey, especially if it's in a space where maybe there's not a lot of information or maybe they feel very isolated, what are some of the strategies and some of the ways that you help them take care of themselves through the process? Because as a caregiver, and I remember even my mom initially, the amount of effort and energy and time she put in for my brother was exhausting. And I mean, she wouldn't have traded that, yet I watched her deteriorate in her own energy and health and ability to, just have space for herself. And so what are some of the things that you share with other caretakers and parents who are faced with these kinds of situations where they find themselves 24/7 being a caregiver? How can they step away? How can they take time for themselves? How can they replenish, refuel, rest? Because I think sometimes there's the thought that I can't not be around this child 24/7, and they have to be able to remove themselves from that space.
Well, first of all, let me just throw something at you that will scare you, okay? 67% of caregivers will pass away before the person they're caring for.
Wow.
If you're over 70, it jumps to 70% will die first. And when you look at older couples and one's got Alzheimer's and the other one is trying to take care of them, you see that figure a lot better than you do when you look at young people taking care of kids. But I wasn't told to take care of myself. I didn't know how to take care of myself. And when my son was about 12 years old, I ended up in the hospital nearly dying. And I was so ill that we had to overnight ask somebody to take care of him for a while I recovered. And I had to be cared for 6 months. Well, okay, that is the bad part of what we don't know and why we need to learn things. But the good thing is that there are people now that are beginning to talk about this. We're sharing a little bit more than we used to. And I look at even my parents, they didn't want to talk about anything that was hard. And if you were caring for somebody, the last thing you want to do is to share with somebody, oh, it's hard. I had a really bad day, and cry about it or whatever, because it looks like you don't love that person or you wouldn't be saying that. No. We have those feelings. We have those physical needs to be able to rest and to be able to care. But when you have a child like ours needed, I could not sleep because I was always listening that he might throw up and then drown in that because he could not turn himself over. And so there are things that we have to learn. And it goes back to the very thing that when I first rode on an airplane and they said, if anything happens, the oxygen drops down, put it on yourself first and then on your child. And I thought, oh, how selfish is this? Because I didn't understand what they were telling me. But if you think about that, that is the best way to understand. If you pass out, you're both gone.
Right.
And if you can say, all right, I'll do the best I can to take care of myself, then you have to learn how to say, I need rest. Mm-hmm. I need to take a few minutes to just, rest, even if there's nobody there. You've got to turn loose of some of that. Somebody, I need help. And most of us feel like, well, if they really loved us, they would recognize what's in it. No, we're not mind readers, but we're afraid to tell somebody that we need an hour by ourselves. If we could just go to the grocery store and not have to carry this extra person with us, that is going to be a lot of, hard labor of putting them in the car. And back when I was young, we had no special doors that would open. We had no parking places. We had to park out in the middle of between narrow cars, unload a wheelchair and get that child and set them in the middle of where the traffic is. And the same thing to unload them. You have to back the car out part way and leave the child behind another car. Well, okay, if we can just think, okay, what do we have available for us? And you may have to do a little research. get on there on AARP, get online to look at anything that has to do with the problem that you're addressing. It's your responsibility to find out, get the knowledge that you need. What is cerebral palsy? What is it going to be like? What can I do? What can I not do? And then work within those parameters. But your problem is not going to be exactly like mine. So we do the research and then we watch. And one of the things that I like to tell people is nobody's going to know what you need if you don't tell them. But if you can just say, if they say, well, can I do anything for you? We usually come back with, oh, no, I'm okay, thanks. And we're not. And my sister stopped me one time when I had a really major surgery. And she said, Cheryl, when you go home, the next time somebody says, what could I do for you? Don't say, oh, nothing. You have deprived them of a blessing.
Right.
And we never think of that.
No.
But it's true. Just somebody to come in, if it's your parent, and read to them for an hour or sit with them if they don't really respond and give you a break for an hour to go. If you want to soak in the tub, sit outside or go get groceries by yourself. Right. That would relieve a lot of the stress that we have within us. So we need to ask.
Well, and see, I think there's so many things I want to pull out of that. One is the fact that there is the power of the ask. I think people think asking for help is a sign of weakness when actually asking for help is an incredible sign of strength. It takes courage to ask for what you need and to be able to very clearly set expectations and boundaries inside of that. And I think there is such a misunderstanding in our culture around asking for help and what that perception, being vulnerable, being open is an incredible strength. And to ask for that help, to ask for someone, and to your point, on the flip side, we are robbing someone of their joy. One of the questions that I ask people when you're showing up and playing small is, who are you not serving? Whose permission are you taking away? And the third one is, who are you not letting shine their light? And I remember my best friend and I had a conversation once where it was an example of, made a comment about, oh, I wanted to be in the fetal position last Thursday. And I remember her saying, so how come my phone didn't ring? And I said, what? And she goes, I don't remember the phone ringing Thursday. And I said, oh, you're a mother, you got 3 kids, one's my goddaughter. And she said, so you get to decide how I get to be your best friend. And it was such a real moment, because she goes, how do you feel when you're the person that people reach out to when they need help or guidance or a shoulder? And I said, I feel awesome, right? And she said, then how come you don't allow anyone else to feel that for you? And you don't realize that when we don't ask for help, we're not letting someone stand in their gift. We're not giving them the joy to serve and to feel like they get to lift us up when we're the caretaker and we do those things. And, the other thing that you said, which is a huge thing we discuss on this show and even in the work that I do, is this notion of what's selfish versus what's self-full. And I love the analogy of the oxygen mask is just so on point, because people think that's selfish when actually that's a function of being self-full. Because selfish says I'm doing this with no regards and with no respect to others, and because I'm all entitled and I think it's about me. Self-full says I'm doing this to serve others. And when you put yourself in that position, like you said, to give yourself that oxygen mask, because if I'm not breathing, neither one of us survive. Because this person cannot survive without me. So I can only give that what I keep replenishing. And if I'm depleted and tapped out and burnt, and then all I'm given is fumes and crud and the icky, gross stuff that's on the bottom, the sludge, because I never put fresh, new energy, water, whatever you want to call it, in there. I think that's just so powerful, and we miss that so much. We have gotten in the space where we're so self-deprecating around being selfish, and I can't ask for help, it's weak, and all the strength and all the courage live inside those two spaces.
Well, and one more thing, Candy, that we need to learn as neighbors, as family members that are not doing the caregiving, to ask, can I come in and specifically, can I come in and change your sheets once a week? Could I come in and do your laundry for you? I had 2 women that came to my house one time, and they had toilet brushes over their shoulders, and they were singing and they were so happy. And it was the surgery where my sister had said, don't say there's nothing somebody can do. Well, what'd they do? They came to my door and I said, what are you doing? And they said, well, we came to clean your toilets because we know that your husband's not going to and your kids are too little. They're not going to think about it. And I said, oh, no, I don't want you to do that. You know, it's this, I don't want somebody, I don't want to be dependent or owe somebody for doing something kind. Well, they laughed, they came in, they cleaned the toilets, and they left. And I have never, ever forgotten that. And then there was one other lady that was an older lady at church, and she said, honey, you're always there for everybody else. I'm telling you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come once a week on Friday morning, and I'm going to change your sheets. And that's what she did. But during that time we visited, she helped me to understand a lot of things that were just, you know, it was just good visiting. And it wasn't hard for me because she was helping me do the hard part, you know, of the manual part I wasn't supposed to be doing. But I just think sometimes we overlook those who are there. And the second major problem that young families have when they're dealing with having a special needs child is that they lose so many friends. They feel lonely and isolated. Okay, how about if we reverse this as the friends and the family and start saying, I'm coming over, I'm bringing you lunch, or I'm bringing you dinner on Thursday nights, or I'm coming in to do so-and-so, and I'll let you just go to the store and I'll stay here with your child or whatever. I had one friend when our son was little, he cried night and day. He didn't sleep as an infant. And I was so worn out and on the verge of a nervous breakdown by the time we finally learned what was wrong. But I had one friend that would say, bring him over. It's all right. He doesn't bother me. But he would cry. So she would run the vacuum cleaner. She didn't try to worry about it. She just ran the vacuum cleaner. And that was the only person I trusted to take care of me because she told me, he cries, I run the vacuum cleaner. And she wasn't trying to hide it and make herself look like, you know, she can do something that I couldn't do, which would have made me feel so inadequate as a mom. But, you know, sometimes there isn't anything that you can do, and somebody else just sharing the load with you will save you physically and mentally. And just being aware of it is what you need to do.
I mean, that in itself is so beautiful. It speaks so much around community and tribe. And when somebody isn't, because I think it's incredibly important that people hear what you said around, she didn't try to better you. She didn't try to show you that she could do something. She didn't belittle you. She came with an incredible amount of compassion, kindness, and grace, and just allowed you space. And I think that's so important for people to understand when it comes to caregiving, is it's not about fixing something. It's not about you doing something that someone else can't do. It's not about you having the answers. And people say that even when it comes to grief, they're like, I don't know what to do. And to your point, then ask or volunteer. Hey, I know you got to have the dog poop picked up in your backyard. You know what? Just thought I'd do it for you. Instead of just bringing a casserole and another casserole and another casserole and another casserole, ask what's really needed, or show up in space and just hold space, but don't think you have to fix it. I think that's where people get so uncomfortable that they want to fix something. They want to touch something. They want to make it okay, when, to your point, sometimes it's not okay. Sometimes it is exactly what it is. And I love that there is a quote that says, we don't ever have to lose ourselves in the space that says it is what it is. It is what we choose to accept. And when you allow yourself a space of acceptance to say, okay, this is the reality, and I can still show up from a deeply compassionate, kind, and graceful space to just love and hold space for another human being and create that sense, that connection and community and tribe. I think that's a missed art in our culture.
It is. And speaking to that particular thing, the number one problem that families have, now get this, is that they're so worried about what other people think of, and they talk about what is bothering them. And what I noticed was that those young families would say, oh, I went to the grocery store today and I never want to take my child out again. This happened to me. Has it ever happened to you? And everybody starts writing in, yeah, this is what happened to me. Yeah, this is what happened to me. And it makes them feel inadequate as a parent. They're doing the best they can. And if you have a child with autism, they're going to explode when they hear something that you don't even hear, maybe in a fluorescent light. And it sends them over the edge. They start crying, and the parents doing everything they can to try to make the situation better. And I overhear parents walking by going, well, if that was my child, I'd just take them out and spank them. because they have no compassion and no sense of they're dealing with more than I did. But the other part of that is, don't think because you have had a child with special needs, you know everything about somebody else's child.
Right.
I had people that were specialists that would even say, haven't you ever thought about potty training him? He was 11 years old before we finally got that through. It took 3 years to learn to drink from a straw. It took 41 years for him to learn to hold a cup and to be able to give himself a drink when he wanted it instead of only when somebody offered it. Now think about that. We just don't realize what all's involved in it. And the part about young families who have children that are not easily potty trained, I have now learned all these years later that it goes back to the very beginning of the neurological damage that was done at birth. And it makes it where his body does not tell him what he needs to do.
Right.
And now his body doesn't tell him when he takes a drink or has a bite of food, it's going to his lungs. And so we can no longer give him anything by mouth. Now imagine, you go 41 years without ever being able to get a drink. You finally learn how, and they take it away from you. You love M&Ms all your life, and now we can't offer him any. We can't give him birthday cake. We can't celebrate with food anyway. And that was one thing he learned to do, was to feed himself. And he was good at that. And it took an hour or an hour and a half to eat. But we don't think about, we're just looking at trying to fix somebody else's problem sometimes. And that's maybe one of the most hurtful things that families can have done for them.
Well, and I don't even think it's just in this space of, families that have kids with special needs or caregivers. I think it's our culture in general. We're always looking at somebody's A-track and think we know their story, and we judge that book by the cover all the time, and we make these assumptions. Right. Assumptions are so damning and dangerous, and we don't realize the critical nature that they have to shut down relationships and communication and connection, because regardless of somebody else walking a similar journey or having a path, to assume that you know exactly what they need in any moment, to make an assumption of how to serve somebody, to make without asking, and the two things I really, this fires me up more than anything, is the fact that we don't ask permission to vent, and we don't ask permission to give advice. And it's so, I struggle with that mightily, that people make assumptions and they think they see something, and we do it collectively. I do it. I'm guilty of it like other people. I have become more mindful of it. But that judgment, that very quick judgment to say, well, that person looks like this, so therefore. And I know they did a powerful commercial. It was a European beer company, I think, or Australian beer company, that they literally just put a picture of a person up. And people got to put whatever label that came to mind based on the picture they saw. And like, one was a gentleman that looked a little rough, and it said, prejudice, it said, and they just put words based on, and then what they did is they had the people come and meet each other in person. And then they talked about how hurtful, how damning it is when people put those labels on them simply because they decided to have a ring in their nose, or because they have tattoos, or because they cut their hair short, or because they're this or that. It's such a powerful commercial, but it speaks to the fact that we're so quick to write somebody else's house before making sure ours is in order. And it's amazing to me how much people want to point the finger out and say, well, I would never. And it's like, first of all, if you'd stop spending so much time worrying about what I'm doing and focus on what's broken here, you wouldn't be so concerned about what I'm doing on the side. And I think that's just, we're in such a place in our culture right now where we've really isolated ourselves further from each other, and we're polarizing more than connecting. And a lot of it has to do with those assumptions, those judgments, those things that you're talking about. I don't think it just pertains to the space of, caretakers. I think it's a collective issue that we have to address.
Right. Well, and there, I remember as a child, somebody told me one time, said, every time you point your finger out, there are 3 more pointing back at you.
Yeah.
So remember that, we're quick to figure out what's wrong over there at their house, but we're really hard pressed to figure out what's wrong with ours that we need to be focused on.
Yeah. So Cheryl, I'm curious, because there's some people listening right now that are feeling such a deep connection to you. I can feel that and know that. And so if they want to learn more, and perhaps they are a caretaker who felt that they've been isolated or feel that they haven't been heard or haven't been able to use their voice appropriately, what's the best way for them to connect with you, to learn more about how they can care for themselves in the process as well?
Okay, well, first of all, if they would like to go to and you'll write my name out so that they'll see it, but if they just go to Cheryl-Ginnings.com, they'll see, I do speaking and I do coaching and I do writing, but I'm there. And if somebody wants to connect with me, there's a little bar on there where they can connect. And the other thing is that most of my work I've done under the brand of Courage to Overcome. And courage is courage, and then the number 2, that was the name of the program on the radio. It's on iTunes, Courage to Overcome. I didn't even know it. I had 126 shows out there before I accidentally saw them. And it's under another, somebody else's copyright, but it's really my material. So I'm having it redone so that I can take commercials off and use it, because I talk about things from autism all the way to Alzheimer's. Yes. And then in the book that I wrote, there are so many practical suggestions in there on how to overcome a lot of the things. There's like 30 little chapters. They're small. It's like, what do I do about when I have jealousy between siblings, or, what if my child can't do this or can't do that? Or what do I need to know if I'm caring for my parent before they don't want to tell me anything? Because that will happen. But if they want to go to those, I'm on most of the social media as Cheryl Ginnings, so LinkedIn is probably one of my favorites right now, but I have a lot on Facebook. So anything, if they just find my name and Google it, they'll probably find more ways than they want to connect to me.
And we will have links to your website and other things that are below. So I highly encourage, if you want to have more conversations around how to position yourself, from a space where you are caring for yourself first. What are some of the things that might help you feel like you're more connected with others who are experiencing similar things, or just even follow the work that Cheryl's doing, connect with her, book her, any of those things, please, please, please reach out. I cannot stress how important it is for more people to be having this conversation. We need to talk about the things that we were already always told not to discuss growing up, and it's time that we start opening that up and having these rich discussions, because it's the only way that people feel like they can connect, and the way they feel that they're served, and the way that we can lift each other up. So please reach out to her. And as we're closing, this time went really fast. Is there any last, kind of nugget or last thought that you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Well, one of the things that I forgot to mention, if they go to my site and connect with me, if they'd like to have a free ebook, I just finished one called The Top 5 Problems That Families Face When They Have Special Needs Kids. Oh, and I'll be glad to give them that copy. And the other thing is that what I'm doing is trying to say, I want to be a voice for people who have no voice. Mm-hmm. And if I can do that, I will be happy. And I said, as long as I've got a voice, I will be out there talking and trying to help other people.
Beautiful.
But thank you so much for the time to try to help people understand. There's a lot of us in the same boat. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk.
Well, I am so grateful and just blessed to have you on the show. I truly just love who you are. You have the most wonderful spirit, and to be able to share some of your story and be able to share a space where others can deeply connect and know that they're not alone is everything. So thank you for being such a beautiful guest today, and for joining me. And for all of you listening, thank you. Thank you so much for continuing to tune in, to engage in these conversations with the incredible powerhouse thought leaders that I continue to have on the show as guests. And so if you haven't subscribed, please do so. I am on iTunes and YouTube, so that you do not miss an episode. These conversations are needed. And as we've talked about so many times, leadership ultimately is a choice. It is a choice in how you choose to show up. It is a choice in how you choose to serve others. And it is a choice in how you choose to take personal responsibility inside those two spaces. And the only way you can do that is to say yes to yourself first. And so with that, this is Candy. Just know that I'm sending so much love and heart-to-heart hugs out to all of you. Thank you for continuing to bless me and join me on these shows. Cheryl, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
So with that, we will catch up with all of you next week on the next episode of the Powerhouse Podcast. Be good, everyone.